afternoon. It is a privilege to be here and to meet so many people who do amazing work in the light of trauma. And already in the last 24 hours, we have heard horrendous stories about trauma that people went through, and also the new Freedom Fellows who said, if I couldn't come here, I would be plunged into despair. And the great thing that we're doing here is to provide hope, because without hope, you have nowhere to go. And that's also the message I'd like to give about trauma, in that we have learned a few things about trauma that is somewhat helpful in help people to overcome it. So my reference point is a trauma that happened in my own backyard, what happened in 9/11. And I was quite involved in that. And that morning, of course, was a horrendous situation for people who lived in America, around the world. And we were dumbfounded. And there's a very big part of being traumatized. You don't know what's going on. You're at a loss for words, and your body gets activated to go into automatic fight-flight responses. And so people in New York after 9/11 were running. I met people who ran until the soles of their feet ran out somewhere in Central Park, and their feet started to bleed. Your body automatically starts fighting and fleeing, and your brain disappears. You just do stuff that makes it go away. And then slowly we realize that at the core of trauma is the inability to activate the fight-flight response, and you are being held down, you're being controlled, you're being immobilized, and if there's nothing you can do, you go into trauma mode. And trauma is not about that event that happened back then, because that event is over. Trauma is about that your brain and your mind is changed, and you get stuck, and you feel biologically and mentally like it's still going on. Trauma is about the present, and how you experience the present in the light of the past. You start feeling as if your life is in danger right now, when in fact the danger has passed. And one of the great things that really helped us to understand more about trauma is that we got to understand some things about the brain. And I actually did the first neuroimaging study of what happens when people go into their trauma, and what we discovered is when you go into your trauma, you lose your frontal lobe. You become dumbfounded. You become angry. You become upset. And you do stuff that is completely unreasonable, and people around you may actually get scared of you because you get so frozen and so upset that you're no longer present. And so what we go to understand is the impact of trauma is on your limbic system. That primitive part of your brain that we have in common with all mammals, that is basically in charge of the housekeeping of your body, is in charge of just in an animalistic way make you feel like in danger, and causes you to fight and to flee all the time. So the big challenge of treating trauma is to help to calm down that limbic system, that automatic response in the back of the brain, and to help people to get their frontal lobe back online. But when you're involved in trauma, that disappears. You are overwhelmed. Trauma is not an unpleasant experience, it's an experience of horror. Everybody uses the word trauma these days, but no, trauma is not about unpleasant things that happen to you. It's about things that leave you utterly befuddled, helpless, and so overwhelmed that you cannot encompass the experience. In fact, people always say, tell me your trauma story. You cannot tell your trauma story. When you're in your trauma, it is all overwhelming, and your whole body keeps getting overwhelmed. And because you're so overwhelmed, your brain and your mind cannot integrate what happens, and pieces of the past keeps coming back over and over again. So when you get traumatized, you're stuck in the past, and you feel like it's still happening right now, which makes traumatized people oftentimes very difficult to be with, because they tend to get very scared and very angry in response to minor stimuli, and they keep reacting to things as if the trauma is not over. How do you relive your trauma? Not as a story. Once you can tell a story, that's helpful, but that's not where you live in your trauma. You feel it in your body. Again, all of you in this room who have been traumatized, and I bet there's a lot of you here right now, you feel it in your gut, and you feel it in your chest. You feel it in sensations in your body. And these are unpleasant sensations, overwhelming experiences, and you try to get away from it, and you can't. So your whole organism gets disturbed. It affects your appetite, it affects your sleeping, it affects every part of your biology. And so what you organize yourself around is trying not to feel things, trying to not experience things, and you try to numb yourself out as much as you can in order to continue to function. Everybody tries to function, but something gets in the way because the body continues to respond. But the shutting down in and of itself is quite dangerous, because when you're shut down, you cannot learn from experience. You cannot take on new experiences. So you need to help the body to feel safe. I'll get back into that in a second. So what do people do who feel constantly out of control, overwhelmed around the world? You take substances. You smoke ganja. You smoke dope. You take alcohol. Huge amount of issues with drug addiction, because people desperately try to keep their bodies under control. And then the issue is secondarily your use of drugs, but primarily what are the drugs trying to do to help you under control. And so you don't relive the memory about the trauma per se, but your body keeps responding to things as if they're dangerous, leading to domestic violence, for constantly being angry with people, being unable to make compromises with people, understanding other people's point of view. And one way of getting away from that horrible feeling inside is to act and to do things. For example, when I look at what's happening in Ukraine, it's terrible what they're going through, but I'm even more worried what will happen afterwards. Because people's brains get changed, and your brain continues to be activated to deal with horrendous circumstances, but when the trauma is over, you just have your feelings left, and it's after the trauma is over, will you be able to function? That's really the price that people pay afterwards. So we have learned something about treatments. And a lot of people claim, I have found a perfect answer for trauma. My method is a great method. I'm always skeptical about it, because it's very hard to treat trauma. I love to show this picture of the Webb telescope. In 1980, when we created this diagnosis, we said, it's an extraordinary event outside the usual realm of human experience. And then we realized slowly that trauma is everywhere, all the time, that a quarter of all women in the US alone have been sexually violated. 1 out of 4 kids have been severely beaten up by their own caregivers. So trauma is very common. And then we knew nothing about treatment 25 years ago. And it's not that we knew nothing about treatment, but it wasn't part of our world. And so we slowly started to learn things. And we're still very much in the process of learning things. And what's so important for people like me is to hear from people like you what's been helpful to you. And oftentimes you find that people give very surprising answers. And one of my great experiences in my life was to be an advisor to the Truth Commission in South Africa and to hang out with Bishop Tutu. Bishop Tutu never read a book about how to treat trauma. He was about the best trauma therapist I ever met. What did he do? He danced with people. He sang with people. He let his beneficence shine on other people. And I credit Tutu more than anybody else with having prevented a massacre which was predicted after the turnover in South Africa. So a leader who can really help people feel safe and to give people a sense of joy and agency is so important in all this. And to my mind, the Freedom Foundation plays part of the role. But we're still on track to learn things all the time. So what have we learned? First of all, in order to overcome trauma, you need to be able to tell the truth. And that's very much what I hear here, is that people have an opportunity to tell their truth. That is really quite different from the majority of the population who I treat, who happens to be people who get sexually molested by their own families. And if you get molested by your own family, it is oftentimes very hard to tell the truth. And people turn against you when you tell the truth. That's true for some political communities also. So being able to find a way of finding words to say, this is what happened to me, is the beginning. But being able to tell the story is just the beginning of the recovery process, because the body continues to relive the trauma. Very powerful, something that we're doing here, that people acknowledged yesterday when we went around the circle. You establish community. You establish a group of people who have your back, who are there for you, who say, I'll be with you no matter what. We are social animals, and we need to have people around us who believe in us and who are there for us when we're in distress. And that's a very important function of the Freedom Foundation, is to help people to create a community. And I actually am blown away by the beauty of what you guys are doing. The second thing is, once you get traumatized, you have a feeling inside that you're helpless. You have tried to do something in the past, and you helplessly stood by while your friends were being killed, while the forest burned down, while these terrible things that you have seen, and then you feel there's nothing I can do. So the natural reaction to deal with trauma is to get paralyzed and to collapse. But clearly a very important part of healing from trauma is to keep that body going and to do things. Have that sense of agency that I can do something. Again, very central to the work that we are examining here. What can we do to make a difference? And if you give up on that, that becomes very difficult. The third thing is about you. You get changed by trauma, and you go constantly into fight-flight responses. You may blow up at people, you may shut down. So you need to learn to regulate yourself. And that's a very big part of what you need to do to overcome your trauma. It's very nice to act out there, but even more important is to act in here and to take care of this poor creature that you are. And so you need to help to calm yourself down. I did a first study on yoga for PTSD, and my colleague said he really has gone off the deep end now. He thinks that putting your butt in the air and twisting your spine into a pretzel helps you with PTSD. Yes, it did. And it turned out that in our yoga study, yoga did better than any of the traditional psychiatric medications, many of which I did the first studies on. And so learning to regulate yourself, yoga, dancing, music, very powerful. I go to Buenos Aires and I see people tango dancing. And so that clearly was invented to help traumatized Argentinians deal with their trauma. I talked with Nelson Mandela. He says, what helped me most on Robben Island with all the torture that went on was to become a boxer. Because in boxing, you need to really learn to be in tune with people. So getting your body in tune with itself and with the people around you is very powerful. In the US of A, if you start doing music with people who are traumatized, people say, you've gone crazy. Luckily, in South Africa and India and Southeast Asia and Africa, people say, that's a very good treatment, and it is. But again, when you're traumatized, you get scared of yourself. And so you need to learn to access yourself. And it's very good to have our friends here who are meditation experts, because meditation and going inside is terribly important. You need to really access yourself and help you to overcome your fear of you. Now, a big part of trauma is your fear, you're afraid of your internal memories, you're afraid of your internal reactions, and you need to learn to meet that creature who you are, and to meet yourself and to learn to tolerate yourself. After that, you can process traumatic memories. But if you go straight into the trauma, your body isn't ready to do it. And so that needs to wait for a while until that body is safe and that body feels calm. And then there's two more subjects that I'll talk about in great detail on Wednesday. You can actually play computer brain interface games, neurofeedback, and help your brain to calm itself down and to get refocused. And most recently, our last study is on psychedelics. I've met already a number of people here who told me how much they have benefited from MDMA treatment. I was the principal investigator of one of the arms of the big MDMA study, and what we found is MDMA, it can be spectacularly helpful to help you to calm yourself down, to meet yourself, and develop self-compassion, which then makes it possible to overcome your trauma. But it's incredibly hard work, and anybody who goes and finds treatment for trauma is a hero for being able to face all the horrors that are living inside of them, and it's very hard. And I celebrate anybody who does that. Thank you very much.